She stopped me at the morning flower market, then whispered, "I've searched for you so long." The smell of crushed eucalyptus and damp canvas was heavy in the morning air, but it was the silence that caught my attention first. I stood beneath the overlapping green umbrellas of the downtown farmers market with a 50-pound bag of soil amendment braced against my shoulder, waiting for a florist to finish arguing with a delivery driver about sunflower buckets. Around me, the Saturday crowd kept moving in bright fragments: paper coffee cups, canvas tote bags, wet basil leaves, children tugging at sleeves, vendors calling out prices over the clatter of folding tables. Then the stream split around a woman who had stopped walking. She stood beside the sunflowers with a cream-colored envelope crushed in both hands, her light cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders despite the warm morning air. She was not looking at the flowers. She was looking at me. For 1 second, I did not move. 4 years can become a very heavy thing when it walks into a market without warning. Amelia Brooks had left this city on a gray afternoon with 2 suitcases, a cracked phone screen, and the kind of goodbye that tried to sound temporary even while both of us knew it was not. Back then, I'd been standing on a job site with my hands in my pockets, pretending patience was the same as courage. I had watched her taillights disappear past the old conservatory gates and told myself that some route survived by going dormant. Now she was standing 10 yards away, older by 4 years, steadier in the face, and still able to stop every practical thought in my head. I adjusted the soil bag on my shoulder and crossed the cobblestones toward her. My work boots scraped over a dropped eucalyptus stem. The scent released sharper under my heel. "Ethan," she said. Her voice was lower than I remembered. It carried the fatigue of someone who had already made 3 desperate phone calls before breakfast and had not liked any of the answers. "Amelia." I stopped 2 feet away and kept the soil bag between us, partly because it was heavy and partly because I needed a boundary I could trust. "It's been a long time." She did not smile. She held out the envelope. "I didn't know where else to find you," she said. "The foreman at your old firm told me you still come here on Saturday mornings for the specialty compost." "Only when a greenhouse director buys the wrong amendment and calls it soil," I said before I could stop myself. For the first time, the corner of her mouth twitched. It was small. It vanished almost immediately. But the market noise came back for half a breath. Then her grip tightened around the envelope again. "They're going to tear down the Heritage Terrace." The soil bag shifted against my shoulder. "The conservatory terrace?" I asked. She nodded. "The city engineer flagged the root system of the main oak. They say it's compromising the foundation wall. If it isn't stabilized by Tuesday, they're bringing in the bulldozers." Tuesday. I looked past her at the bright yellow sunflowers, their heads turned toward the morning light like they trusted the day to behave itself. "That's 3 days." "I know." The envelope bent further under her fingers. When she said the word, her voice thinned until the market around us sounded too loud for the amount of air she had left. "I called 3 commercial firms," she said. "All of them said it requires heavy shoring, a root bridge system, and a drainage redesign. All of them said it takes weeks just to plan." She looked down once, then made herself meet my eyes. "You're the only one I know who works with ancient roots and heavy earth moving at that scale." The word "no" landed harder than it should have. I had built private gardens over underground parking decks, lifted mature olive trees onto estate terraces, saved heritage oaks from pool excavations, and once spent 9 hours arguing with a billionaire about why a cedar could not simply be moved 6 feet to the left for symmetry. I knew ancient roots. I knew retaining walls. I knew the slow language of soil better than I knew most people. And I knew Amelia. At least I used to. "Why is the city moving that fast?" I asked. Her thumb rubbed the corner of the envelope until the paper softened. Marcus Vance. The name turned the morning colder. I remembered Marcus, city planning office, press suits, polite voice, the kind of man who said public safety when he meant my authority. 4 years ago, he had been circling the conservatory board with grant proposals and private development contacts, always smiling like he was doing everyone a favor by waiting. "What does Marcus want?" I asked. "The west parcel." Amelia's answer came too quickly. which meant she had been forcing herself not to say it all morning. The terrace blocks access to a redevelopment plan he's been pushing through a shell nonprofit. If the oak is condemned, he gets a safety justification to demolish the wall and reroute the garden entry. Once that happens, the board can't afford restoration. The parcel gets leased out. So the tree is the excuse. The tree is the only thing keeping the sanctuary whole. Behind her, a vendor dropped a bucket. Water spread across the stones and carried sunflower petals toward the drain. I shifted the soil bag off my shoulder and set it carefully beside my boot. I can inspect it and give you options. I said, "Do you want me to take this on formally?" She blinked, as if the question was not the one she had prepared herself to answer. Formally? With a scope, a rate, and a written note that I'm not making promises until I've tested the site. I kept my voice even. I don't step into a crisis and start making decisions for someone else's property. Amelia looked at the envelope, then at the soil bag, then back at me. A memory passed across her face and was gone. The two of us, years ago, arguing over a greenhouse irrigation map at midnight because she wanted to save a row of half-dead camellias and I wanted to save her 3 weeks of wasted labor. "You still do that," she said. "Do what?" Make the ground rules sound kinder than a yes. I did not answer. Some things grow around silence until silence becomes part of their shape. She pulled a folded city notice from the envelope and handed it to me. "Yes," she said. "I want you to take it on formally. Inspect it. Tell me if there's any way to save it." I took the notice by the edge, careful not to brush her fingers. "Show me the site." The drive to the conservatory was mostly silent. I followed her small white hatchback in my work truck, the heavy suspension rattling over the city's uneven pavement. On the passenger seat beside me, the city notice lay open, stamped in red across the top. Emergency Structural Hazard Review. I read it twice at stoplights, not because I needed to, but because the official language annoyed me. Potential root intrusion, foundation displacement, imminent public hazard. Paper liked to pretend it was precise when it was afraid. The conservatory rose out of the neighborhood like a glass memory. Its old iron gates were painted deep green, chipped at the hinges, and flanked by stone pillars veined with moss. When we pulled through, the air cooled at once. The city noise softened behind the canopy. Leaves shifted overhead, layered and dense, breaking sunlight into moving patches across the gravel lane. I parked near the service entrance and climbed out with my tool bag. Amelia was already standing beside the path, one hand on the gate latch, the envelope tucked under her arm. She had always moved quickly when she was worried, as if speed could outrun consequence. "Before we go in," I said, "who knows I'm here?" The board chair, my head gardener, Luis, and the city inspection office, because I filed an emergency consultant notification before I left. Good. I slung the tool bag over my shoulder. And Marcus? He'll know by lunch. Then we work before lunch. She led me past the Rose House, through a corridor of old brick planters, and out onto the Heritage Terrace. The situation was worse than the notice suggested. The ancient oak stood at the center of the terrace like a living cathedral. Its trunk was wider than a dining table, bark deeply furrowed, branches spreading over the stone balustrade and the beds of ferns below. Around it, the terrace curved along the rear of the conservatory, supported by a granite retaining wall that overlooked a narrow service street. The wall was bowing, not dramatically enough for a tourist to notice, dramatically enough for my stomach to tighten. The middle course of granite blocks had shifted outward almost 2 inches. The mortar joints were cracked in a long, tired smile. Beneath the balustrade, a hairline fracture stepped down the face of the wall toward a rusted drain outlet that was clogged with mud and leaves. I set my tool bag on a stone bench. A crooked copper watering can sat on the ledge beside it, dented near the handle, its spout bent slightly to the left. I remembered that can. Amelia used to carry it through the propagation house when she wanted to water the seedlings herself instead of trusting the interns. She had once sworn it poured better crooked. Seeing it there did something foolish to my chest. I ignored it and pulled out a digital caliper, a sonic moisture meter, and a soil probe. Amelia stood on the flagstone, arms folded over the envelope, watching the wall as if it might collapse faster if she looked away. Stay behind the chalk line, I said, then caught myself. Please, I need the edge clear while I measure the displacement. She nodded and moved back. I knelt near the base of the wall. Damp clay soaked through the knee of my work pants. The smell of wet mineral soil rose immediately, cool and metallic. I pressed the probe deep behind the first course, then again, near the drain. The meter screamed water saturation. I took 6 readings, then 12. Then I marked the mortar crack with blue tape and measured the wall displacement block by block. Amelia did not interrupt. That was one of the things I had always respected about her. She could be terrified and still let the work speak first. The wall isn't failing because of the roots alone, I said finally. Her fingers tightened around the envelope. I wiped mud off the probe with my thumb. It's failing because the drainage behind the wall is clogged. Water builds up behind the granite, saturates the clay, and increases the lateral pressure. The oak's root mass is taking the blame because roots are visible and water isn't. If they cut the tree down, the wall still comes down in the next heavy rain. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I stood and pointed toward the rusted drain outlet. See the staining under that drain? That's not root pressure. That's years of water trying to escape through a blocked system. The roots are actually stabilizing part of the upper terrace. If the city bulldozes the oak, they remove the only thing binding the top layer. She looked from the drain to the tree. Can you prove that to Marcus? I can prove it to a competent inspector. That is not the same thing. No, I said, it isn't. A breeze moved through the canopy. Somewhere in the greenhouse, a pipe clicked on and off. The crooked copper watering can rocked once against the ledge, its empty body making a small hollow sound. Amelia heard it too. Her eyes flicked toward it and softened for half a second. You kept it, I said. She followed my gaze. It still works. It always poured crooked. It poured where I aimed it. That was never true. This time her mouth really did curve. The smile was tired, but it was there. You hated that can. I respected its confidence. The breath that left her was almost a laugh. Then the conservatory doors opened behind us, and Luis, the head gardener, stepped out with a rolled plan set under his arm. He was in his 60s, sun-browned, with a gray mustache and the expression of a man who had not slept since the city notice arrived. "You're Bennett?" he asked. "That's me." Luis looked at my tools, then at the blue tape on the wall. "Can you save her?" He did not say the tree or the terrace, he said her. Amelia looked away. "I can't promise that yet," I said, "but the city's diagnosis is incomplete." Luis handed me the plan set, original drainage drawings, 1926. Found them in the archives after Amelia made me tear apart 3 cabinets and 1 box of Christmas lights. I said, "Please," Amelia murmured. "You said the wall was not allowed to die on your watch." Luis pointed at her. "Different sentence." I took the drawings and unrolled them across the stone bench. The old ink was faded but readable. There had been a French drain behind the wall, tied to 2 outlets. One was visible. The second, according to the plan, should have been 8 feet north of the oak. I walked the terrace and counted paces and found nothing but ivy and compacted soil. "There's a buried outlet," I said. Amelia stepped closer, staying on the safe side of the chalk line. "If we open it? If it exists and hasn't collapsed, we relieve pressure without cutting major roots. And if it has collapsed? Then we install new drainage, tie back the wall, and build a root bridge before Tuesday." Luis made a sound low in his throat. "That is 3 weeks of work." "It's 3 days of work if nobody sleeps." Amelia turned toward me. "Is it possible?" The question was quiet, not pleading. She had already accepted that the answer might ruin her. I looked at the oak, at the bowing wall, at the damp clay, at the crooked copper watering can catching sunlight on its dented side. My grandfather's voice came back to me from a childhood spent kneeling in orchards while he taught me how not to kill trees with good intentions. "You don't force a taproot, Ethan. You work the soil around it." "I'll need my crew," I said. "A compact excavator with rubber tracks, air spades, helical tiebacks, filter fabric, perforated pipe, a nightwork variance, and access to your archive printer." Amelia's spine straightened. "Done. And I'll need you to handle the board." When they see machinery near that tree, they'll panic. I'll handle the board. I'll also need a licensed structural engineer to stamp the reinforcement addendum. I can generate the field data and root zone plan, but the city will need the structural seal. I know one, Luis said, Nadia Chen. She helped us with the Orchid House roof. Hates Marcus. That's a credential, I said. Amelia looked at me for the first time all morning without fear leading the way. What do you need me to do right now? I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened my crew list. I can start calling equipment and people. If you want to help immediately, coffee would keep us upright. If not, stay here with Luis and help mark the original drain line. She studied me, and I could see her hearing the choice inside the sentence. I'll mark the line first, she said, then coffee. Good. The work began before noon. By sunset, the Heritage Terrace looked like a carefully organized disaster. Floodlights stood on tripods around the oak. Yellow hoses from the air spades snaked across the flagstone. My crew had erected temporary barriers along the service street and installed vibration monitors on the wall. Nadia Chen arrived in steel-toed boots and a red hard hat, glanced at Marcus's notice, and said, "This is politically scented nonsense," which made Luis laugh for the first time all day. We found the second outlet under 6 inches of ivy and 2 feet of compacted clay. It was clogged with roots from a hedge, not the oak. When we opened it, black water seeped out in a slow, foul-smelling ribbon. Amelia stood beside Luis and watched the first pressure bleed from the wall. Her hand went to the crooked copper watering can on the ledge. She turned it upright even though it had not fallen. That was her dent. I remembered. When the world moved too fast, she fixed the one small thing she could reach. At 8 that night, Denise Hall from the board arrived with 2 members and the expression of someone who had been warned by Marcus to expect chaos. Amelia met them at the drafting table before I could speak. "We're not guessing anymore," she said, laying the old drainage plan beside my first measurement sheet. "The wall is moving because water's trapped behind it. Ethan's team is relieving pressure without cutting the oak's primary roots. Nadia Chen is preparing the stamped structural addendum." Denise looked at the mud, the exposed roots, and the blue flags marking every anchor point. "Can we afford this?" Amelia opened a folder. I moved restricted maintenance funds already approved for structural preservation and secured donor advances by phone while Ethan located the buried drain. A lesser version of me would have stepped in to make her case louder. Instead, I kept both hands on the drafting table and let her stand in her own authority. Denise finally closed the folder. "Keep going. Send updates every 3 hours." After the board left, Amelia touched the oak's bark for 5 seconds, then came back and picked up the red pencil. "What's next?" I pointed to the plan. "We worked the soil around the taproot. We worked through the night." The air spades hissed like steam. Clay lifted in careful layers. We exposed roots as thick as my thigh and roots as fine as thread, each one mapped with orange flags before the first tieback went in. I called Torquay readings from the trench while Amelia wrote them beneath the drafting lamp, turning mud, pressure, and steel into a clean field log Nadia could attach to her structural addendum. "Torquay at 1,600 foot-pounds." Amelia wrote it down. "Angle 12 degrees south." She marked the grid. At 2 in the morning, I saw her shoulders lift against the cold. I fetched the fleece-lined canvas coat from my truck and laid it over the back of her chair instead of putting it on her. She paused, pulled it around herself, and kept writing. Luis brought black coffee in 2 dented thermoses. Amelia slid mine across the table without looking up. "Still no sugar?" "Still suspicious of it. You were insufferable at 25. "That is an explanation, not a defense." The laugh that moved around the table was small, tired, and exactly what the night needed. Then the work swallowed us again. At dawn, Marcus Vance arrived. His gray city sedan rolled through the service gate as the sky turned pale behind the conservatory roof. He stepped out in polished shoes, carrying a leather clipboard and the expression of a man who had expected chaos and found competence instead. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "I see you've made quite a mess." "It's a controlled excavation," I said, "and good morning." He ignored that and produced a red stop work order. "Ms. Brooks." My office received an anonymous complaint about unauthorized structural intervention. This site is open and hazardous. I'm pulling the emergency permit. The crew went quiet. A hydraulic hose clicked as it cooled. My first instinct was to step forward and bury him in technical language, but this was Amelia's garden. I looked at her. Do you want me to handle this? Or do you want to? I want to. She stepped in front of me, the fleece-lined coat around her shoulders and the red pencil tucked behind one ear. You are not pulling anything. Marcus, she said, this is the torque-verified field log from the first 4 tiebacks. Nadia Chen's stamped structural addendum is already in your office inbox, copied to the board, the city attorney, and the Historic Preservation Committee. The wall has moved less than 1/16 of an inch since pressure relief began. The lower drain is flowing, and the oak's primary root system is intact. Marcus glanced at the red order. That does not change the public hazard. It does, Amelia said. If you stop an active stabilization process after receiving evidence that it is reducing risk, you assume responsibility for whatever happens next. Do you want me to call the city attorney, or do you want to review the addendum first? Nadia leaned one hip against the drafting table. She's correct, Luis added. And I know where every reporter in this city buys coffee. Marcus looked from the thick steel cables to the field log. Borrowed authority panicked when asked to stand on facts. He slid the red order back into his folder. You have until tomorrow at noon to backfill the trench and clear the equipment, he said. We'll send the final stabilization report by 11, Amelia replied. When his sedan disappeared through the gate, Luis whispered, Amen. Amelia reached back for the folding chair and sat before her legs could betray her. I crouched on the other side of the drafting table, leaving the log between us. You held the line, I said. I thought I was going to throw up on his shoes. Would have improved them. The laugh that escaped her was cracked and immediate. Then she looked back at the trench. We need to finish the drainage pipe before the rain starts. I stood. Then we finish. The next 24 hours blurred into diesel exhaust, crushed gravel, and the rhythm of practical survival. We installed perforated drainage lines wrapped in filter fabric. We set gravel by hand near the fine roots and used the excavator only outside the protected zone. We tensioned the tiebacks in increments, checked the wall movement every 30 minutes, and logged each adjustment under Nadia's supervision. Amelia never retreated to the office. She directed the gravel deliveries when the first truck went to the wrong gate. She talked down a donor who arrived in loafers and nearly fainted at the sight of the trench. She sent 2 interns for sandwiches, then noticed Luis had not eaten and put one directly into his hand without a word. She stood beside me under the drafting lamp when we found an unexpected pocket of saturated clay near the north corner. And instead of asking if it was bad, she asked, What number makes it bad? Moisture over 55 and wall movement over an eighth, I said. She checked the gauge, 46 and 1/32. So not bad. Annoying. Annoying we can work with. She wrote that in the margin. By sunset, the wall had stopped moving. By midnight, the new drain was flowing clear. By the following morning, the trench was backfilled in careful layers, the root collar was protected, the terrace stones were reset, and the crooked copper watering can had been moved 3 times by 3 different crew members, until Amelia finally put a strip of blue tape under it and wrote, Do not relocate, emotionally load-bearing. I saw the label while packing my calipers and nearly dropped them. You saw nothing, she said from behind me. I saw a professional preservation note. You saw nothing. Is the watering can included in the structural addendum? It is central to the site's historic integrity. Nadia walked by with a folder under her arm. I'm willing to stamp that. The city inspection happened at 11:40. Not Marcus. He sent a senior inspector named Clara Min, a woman with steel gray hair, a practical raincoat, and no patience for politics. She walked the terrace with Nadia's addendum in one hand and my field log in the other, stopping at each anchor point, each drain outlet, each reset stone. Amelia walked beside her. I stayed 3 steps back with Luis. That was harder than it should have been. It is one thing to tell yourself you respect someone's agency. It is another thing to stand quietly while the person you still love waits for a government official to decide whether her life's work gets to survive. Clara crouched near the lower drain, watched water move through the outlet, and nodded once. This should have been flagged as drainage failure 2 years ago. Amelia's hand stayed still at her sides. We flagged seepage twice. Document that in your maintenance records. Clara stood. The wall is provisionally stabilized pending a 30-day monitoring report. The oak remains protected. No demolition authorization. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Louise made a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a laugh. Amelia closed her eyes. Clara signed the tablet and emailed the final notice from the terrace. The notification arrived on Amelia's phone with a soft chime. She looked at the screen. The tree stays, she said. The crew cheered then, not loudly, because everyone was too tired to manage loud, but enough for the sound to rise into the oak canopy and scatter 2 birds from the branches. Amelia looked at me across the terrace. The crooked copper watering can sat between us on the ledge, dented, ridiculous, shining in a weak line of sun. I lifted one hand. She lifted hers. That was all. And somehow it felt like more than anything I had said 4 years ago. The fundraising announcement went out that afternoon. The conservatory board, suddenly very interested in community goodwill, scheduled a public thank you at the downtown farmers market for the next morning. Amelia was supposed to speak. The mayor's office was sending a deputy. Clara Min agreed to attend. Nadia promised to show up if someone guaranteed coffee. Louis said he would come only if nobody made him wear a tie. By 3 o'clock, my crew was packing the last tools. I stood at the edge of the terrace, wiping mud off the crooked copper watering can with a rag. It was not my job. It was not even useful. But there was dried clay along the bottom seam, and my hands needed something to do before goodbye became unavoidable. Amelia's footsteps crossed the flagstone behind me. I set the can back on the ledge, exactly on the blue tape. The final sign-off is in the board archive, she said. The 30-day monitoring sensors are active. Louise is pretending not to cry in the fern house. Good, I said. She came to stand beside the watering can. Her light cardigan had been replaced by the heavy canvas coat. The sleeves rolled twice. There was a smudge of soil near her jaw. She had not noticed it. I wanted to reach up and wipe it away. I picked up my tool bag instead. Keep the irrigation lines clear of the new drainage gravel, I said. And don't let Marcus near the west parcel without 3 witnesses and a recording device. Luis already assigned himself that job. Of course he did. I slung the heavy canvas bag over my shoulder and turned toward the service path. Ethan. I stopped. The strap cut into my shoulder. My body knew the shape of leaving too well. I took one breath, letting damp earth and eucalyptus settle in my lungs, then turned back. Amelia stood next to the crooked copper watering can with both hands in the pockets of the coat. The ancient oak shifted overhead, sunlight moving through the leaves and across her face. There's a fundraiser tomorrow morning, she said. At the farmers market, a public thank you for the community support. I heard, I want you there. I'll send Louise my invoice and a short statement for the board. Her mouth tightened, not with anger, but with the effort of not retreating. She pulled one hand from her pocket and touched the strap of my tool bag with 2 fingers. Not as the contractor, she said. The terrace went quiet around us. 4 years earlier, I had let silence make the decision. I had told myself she needed space, told myself her leaving was a transplant shock she would either survive or not, told myself love could be patient from a distance. Maybe some of that had been true. Maybe some of it had been cowardice wearing work boots. Amelia looked down at the tool bag, then back up at me. I didn't come back to the city for the job, she said. I told myself I did. I told the board I did. I told Luis I wanted to restore the conservatory because it mattered, and it does. Her fingers slipped from the strap, but she did not step back. But when the city notice arrived, the first person I thought of was you. Not because you could fix the wall, because for 4 years, every time I saw a garden survive impossible soil, I wondered if I had walked away from the only person who would have waited without making me feel trapped. My throat closed. She drew a shaky breath. I've searched for you in every city I tried to call home. The title line landed softly, not as a confession thrown into drama, but as the truth finally finding enough room to stand. I let the tool bag slide off my shoulder. The heavy canvas hit the flagstone with a dull thud. I was here, I said, buying compost like a man with no imagination. That startled a laugh out of her, wet-eyed and immediate. I offered my hand. She looked at it, then took it. Her fingers were cold from the morning air and roughened slightly from 3 days of work. I closed my hand around hers, not pulling, not claiming, just holding. "You don't force a taproot," I said. Her eyes softened. "You work the soil around it." I should have said something before you left. I should have asked. We were very committed to being quietly noble. We were idiots. Patient idiots. She stepped closer, still leaving daylight between us. "Come tomorrow." "I'll come tomorrow." Not as the contractor. Not as the contractor. The fundraiser drew more people than anyone expected. By 9 the next morning, the downtown farmers market was a sea of canvas umbrellas, flower buckets, city officials, donors, and the old conservatory members who had apparently been waiting years for a public reason to complain about Marcus Vance. I stood near the sunflower stall with 2 black coffees, trying not to look like a man who had spent 20 minutes choosing a clean shirt. Amelia arrived wearing a modest floral dress under a light cardigan, the cream-colored city envelope tucked beneath one arm and the crooked copper watering can in the other hand. She saw the cups and lifted an eyebrow. "No cinnamon?" "Trusted the bean." "Good. You survived one lesson." The ceremony was simple. Denise thanked the donors. Clara Min explained that old walls rarely failed for one reason. Nadia spoke for less than a minute and still made every developer in the front row nervous. Then Amelia stepped forward with the crooked copper watering can at her feet. "My job is to protect a place that belongs to more people than can fit inside its walls," she said. For 3 days, a crew worked through mud, cold, and bad politics to save the Heritage Terrace. Luis found the old plans. Nadia stamped the addendum. Clara reviewed the facts. And Ethan Bennett reminded us that you don't force a taproot, you work the soil around it. Her eyes found mine. "The oak stays," she said. "The wall is certified, the terrace will reopen after monitoring, and the west parcel will remain part of the conservatory." Applause moved through the market. When it settled, she looked at me again. "And personally, I would like to thank my partner for showing up when it mattered." "Partner?" She said it in public, clear and steady, in front of the board, the city, the donors, Luis, Nadia, and half the market. After 4 years of believing devotion did not need a name if it had roots, I finally understood how wrong I had been. After the ceremony, she walked straight to me and handed me the crooked copper watering can. "Hold this," she said. "Because it's historic? Because if I hold it, I'll keep using it as emotional support." "Understandable," I said. "It pours where you aim it." She smiled, and the photographer caught us that way, her shoulder near mine, the watering can in my hand, the sunflowers behind us, and both of us looking like people who had stopped running from the same truth. Months later, that photograph ended up in the conservatory newsletter beside the final stabilization report. The 30-day monitoring period passed without movement, then 60, then 90. The terrace reopened in early autumn with new gravel paths, discrete drainage markers, and a small bronze plaque near the oak explaining the preservation work. I kept working. Estate gardens, rooftop orchards, a foolish koi pond built over a parking garage. But every Saturday morning, unless a job pulled me out of town, I went back to the farmer's market. One crisp morning, 6 months later, I stood under the green umbrellas with 2 black coffees while the market opened around me. The air smelled of damp canvas, crushed eucalyptus, and bread from the bakery truck. Amelia was at the flower stand choosing white anemones for a new exhibit. The crooked copper watering can sat in her canvas tote, its bent spout sticking out like a question mark. She saw me, lifted it, and called, "Back up." For what? Emotional support, historic integrity, possible watering. Very versatile. She crossed the aisle with the ease of someone who no longer had to measure every exit. When she reached me, she took the coffee from my hand. "Correct? Black, no cinnamon, trusted the bean." She took a sip and nodded. "You're learning." We stood together while the city woke around us. This time the crowd did not split around her. She was not a fixed point of panic in the stream. She was rooted and moving at once. I looked past the umbrellas toward the conservatory gates, where the ancient oak rose beyond the glass roof, held by steel no one could see and soil finally allowed to breathe. For years, I had thought patience meant waiting in silence. Now I knew better. Love was the slow work of loosening the ground around fear, offering a hand without closing it too tight, and showing up until both people could stand freely. Amelia leaned lightly against my arm. "Farmer's market next week? I'll be here." "I know," she said. And for once, the words did not feel like hope. They felt like roots. The end.